This is the Flyerdelphia Podcast, presented by SportsTalkPhilly.com, with Kevin Durso, Rob Riches, and Dan Heaning. Hello, Flyers fans, and welcome into another episode of the Flyerdelphia Podcast, part of SportsTalkPhilly.com. I'm your host, Kevin Durso, joined once again by Rob Riches and Dan Heaning. And the preseason is well underway at this point. 4 games in the books, still 4 more to go. So we have a lot to go over on this week's show, and we'll get to the results from those games so far this preseason. Take a look at some of the players we highlighted before the preseason and with the preseason and training camp previews that we did, and look closely at some of the recent roster cuts that were made, cuts being made on Wednesday and Thursday. The roster now down to 29 players, still with 4 games to go in the preseason. And we start with the cuts because up until Thursday, actually it was Thursday and Friday that the cuts were made. I said Wednesday, Thursday, so my bad there. But up until Thursday, the Flyers still had realistically 55 players on the training camp roster. That included injured players, Anthony Stolarz and Derek Hulak. So effectively there were 53 players on the roster. Thursday, 18 get cut, so the roster was trimmed down to 35, 6 more sent to the Phantoms via waivers on Friday. So the roster is effectively down to 29 now. So among the notable cuts, Phil Myers, Yerman Rubtsov, and Carter Hart. But really, among the cuts here, no big surprises here, right, guys?
Yeah, there was no real big surprises. The Flyers made it. They kind of telegraphed what they were going to do by splitting up the squads, but which was essentially like a Flyers squad and a Phantom squad. I do have to say there were a couple players there that I got to give a little credit to. T.J. Brennan, first of all, for sticking around as long as he did, and he played on the. He didn't play. He skated on the Flyer squad for one day. It was ahead of Sanheim, I believe it was. You know, it's really hard for a guy like T.J. Brennan to get in the spotlight with so many of the defensive prospects ahead of him. You know, he's a solid offensive defenseman. He's never really been that great on the defensive side, but he's, you know, at the AHL level, you know, an elite style offensive defenseman. And you got to give him props for sticking around as long as he did, and you know, earning and at least getting some praise from Dave Haxtell. I was also going to ask you guys because, you know, we were expecting Yerman Rubtsov not to be on the Flyers this season, you know, maybe next season or the season after that. But he's going to the Junior League and not the AHL, even though he can go to the AHL this season. What do you guys think about that?
A lot of people seem surprised about that he was sent back to juniors when he was AHL eligible. I'm not. Let's not forget that this kid played, I think, 16 games in Canadian juniors last year when he finally was able to come over. So putting him on the Phantoms, while it would be great for the competition, and I'm pretty sure he could hold his own, I think it would just diminish his role as it was in the KHL. I think they want him to get substantial minutes playing in North America. So a full season in the queue for him to adjust to the North American game and to continue his rapid progression is good for him.
I agree there, Kev. I see no fault with kind of letting him hone his game in the queue. I see, you know, no issues kind of giving him a full season there and just kind of seeing how he can handle the grind of a full season of junior hockey. And obviously, yeah, you know, I wouldn't mind seeing him in Allentown, but at the end of the day, I think sending him up, I mean, you know, Ron Hextall's approach to developing young guys is very much well documented at this point, and that's a typical Hextall move, I'd say, and I really see no harm in it.
Exactly, yes. I agree with you. Yeah, because I was going to say this is Hextall's MO. Because I was thoroughly impressed with Rubtsov during the preseason and during training camp. He looks great, quite honestly. The development looks tremendous after just 1 year, but it's still too soon. And Hextall doesn't rush prospects, and this shouldn't come as a shock to anybody.
Another guy that I was kind of impressed with, I didn't get a chance to see him too much though, was Mikhail Vorobyev. Hextall even admitted that this was the hardest cut he's had to make so far. I fully expect him to be on the team next season, maybe as a 3rd or 4th line center. Would you guys agree with that?
If there's room for him, yeah. I mean, I just have to see how the roster shakes out and from 1 year to the next. But I agree that it should have been a difficult cut for Hextall to make. It's very much so. I watched him come over and have the same kind of vision and the same ability to set up teammates that he had in juniors, or in the World Junior Championships, I should say, that made him the assist leader in that tournament. So I see a lot of good things from him. I see the ability is there. He could be another one of those steals in the draft because he wasn't a high-profile kind of guy when he was selected. So, yeah, I see him giving somebody a run for their money next year when training camp rolls around. Absolutely.
How'd you feel about Ivan Kazarenkov heading out without a contract?
Surprised, because I thought he did enough to at least earn a contract. He was never going to factor into the team's situation, but I thought he did enough to earn himself a contract.
That's something that kind of took me off guard.
Yeah, you figured he at least earned himself some consideration for the contract. Like you would have heard, some buzz that maybe they're in discussion or Hextall's thinking about it, but nothing. It was just, nope, see you later, kid. I thought he played well enough that, you could squeeze him into the system, but maybe they just weren't as impressed as, everybody else was.
I wonder how much was taken into consideration some of the other prospects they have, too, because, while I thought Kazarenkov could have easily earned himself an entry-level contract and be under the team's control, somebody like Connor Bunneman gets named captain of the Kitchener Rangers going back to juniors, and somebody like Carson Twerinski, even though he doesn't have an entry-level deal yet, was sent to Phantoms camp because they wanted an extended look at him before they make a real decision on juniors or not. He is AHL eligible. So, I think they look at a couple of other players that they've drafted themselves recently and maybe value a little bit more. Kazarenkov was the only player on the entire training camp roster that was not under contract in some way. He was the only one on a player tryout. So, at that point in time, I think they just had too many bodies and are looking at other options that they already have in-house that they're going to look to add. Because, truth be told, you had about most NHL rosters on opening night are 22 or 23 players. So you have to fit people in somewhere. I think, and Kazarenkov would have been just another difficult decision down the road. But that's what you do. You do restock the system as you go. So that was why I was still surprised by it. But I think I see the approach here is just we're looking at the players we just drafted. They did make cuts to 4 of the 2017 draft picks very quickly out of training camp. They basically played the rookie game and were sent back to juniors basically almost the next day. So in that respect, I think they look at the number of players they've drafted in recent years, gave a kid a shot, gave him a way to showcase himself, and he'll probably latch on to somebody else now. And you have to hope that it doesn't come back to haunt you.
Do you think there's any kind of motivation to, maybe try and hope that nobody picks him up? So maybe next season you can give him another tryout and see if you're even more impressed by him?
Possibly. I mean, the Flyers have had guys who come into development camp year after year after year because they don't have the professional experience. They're not playing in the American League or things like that, where they're allowed to keep coming back to camp, even though these are players who have been around out of their draft years for 4 or 5 years now. So if he's not latched on to anybody, they may try to reach out again. I can't say anything with certainty right now, but we'll certainly see how that goes as his season progresses and see what happens.
Let's not forget, with 30 other clubs out there, there are a lot of teams with prospect situations that really they kind of, I guess, envy the Flyers, I guess you could say. There are a lot of disorganization amongst other prospect groups in the league. They wouldn't mind, taking a chance on somebody like him, somebody who can probably make an impact and be a bigger name among their prospect pools.
Yeah,
so
Vegas
it's something where the Flyers kind of got to focus on what they've got control of. They don't really have a lot of control from here, but if they can find a way to get their hands back on them, this time next year or next off season, that's just it's a bonus.
Yeah, I can't help but feel that he would be a good fit for Vegas because they need as many prospects as they can find because they can't even fill out an AHL team by themselves right now. So if you're George McPhee, you got to go out and sign this kid, especially if you're building a team from the ground up.
Vegas was kind of where my mind went as well, Dan. I thought that's a pretty likely possible destination for him, just off the top of your head anyway. So what about is there anybody else that kind of stood out in terms of the cuts or anything like that? I know there was a lot to make out of Myers being on that grouping. Not that it was surprising, but there was a lot to be made out of it. What did you guys think?
Yeah, obviously Myers' chances to kind of make the big club, he was still kind of a long shot for him. So I think going to Phantoms camp is something where he can still hone his game. It's absolutely a good situation for him to be in. And, obviously everything that he's done, since basically joining the team has been nothing short of remarkable, and that's something where he'll have a chance to kind of continue that with the Phantoms and work on that in their camp.
Yeah, with all due respect to Phil Myers, because he has the potential to be a very solid, very good defenseman, I never really gave him a good shot to make one of the two opening spots, just because he's coming straight out of juniors. Sam Moran, Robert Hagg, Travis Sanheim all have a couple, for Sanheim, just 1 year in the AHL, so they have that pro-level experience. And it's just sometimes that's just too big of a mountain to climb. So, just sending him down now gives him the chance to adjust to his teammates, get himself into a position with the Phantoms where he could potentially be a top pairing defenseman so he can play big minutes. So maybe next year he can crack the lineup.
Yeah, I'm right there with you guys. He's an incredible talent. There's no question about it. And it's funny. Every time I go to see him do drills in whatever practice, whether it's development camp, in this case training camp, he looks great every time I see him do drills. But there's different, everybody kind of looks good in drills because it's working on sometimes individual skill, sometimes one specific skill. In a game, you're trying to combine everything. And in a game, Rob, we kind of talked about this on last week's show. After that rookie game, I saw him, and he, like we said, we don't know how long he was playing in that game with whatever little nagging injury he had that forced him out. He was back in practice shortly thereafter, so it's not like it was a big deal. But he looked raw, and he looked like he needed the seasoning. And being that this is going to be his first pro year, I'm not surprised he's going to spend it at the AHL level, just like Travis Sanheim did last year. Good first impression, definitely big things to come, but this is not surprising. Now, what about, we kind of passed off like we said, there's no surprises or really notable cuts yet. A lot of the prospects we were talking about before camp have survived the first, and I guess you could say second round of cuts, with Friday's 6 going to the Phantoms. So they will make it to next week for a few more games to see if they do fit. That being said, a lot of the roster is very predictable at this point. You can see probably 3 forwards out of the 18 that are left on the roster at the moment that are left in camp that are going to be headed to Allentown. And it effectively leaves you with a roster battle between Scott Lawton and Mike Vecchione, and then you have Oscar Lindblom and Nolan Patrick. That pretty much decides the last 3 forward spots, because the other forwards that are left on the roster, you have Cole Bardreau, Colin McDonald, and Taylor Lear. Now, Taylor Lear has had a really good preseason to this point, but, McDonald's going to be the captain of the Phantoms again, probably, so he goes back. Bardreau was considered a bit of a dark horse candidate, but still, there's too much up against him for him to really make this team. He's a great player at the AHL level. Very fun to watch down there, quite honestly. But, and then the same thing defensively. With Myers out of the picture, it's down to 3 players for 2 spots. There's not much that's left to be decided, right?
Yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head right there, Kevin. Like, you got to pencil in McDonald, Bardreau, and Lear as Phantoms going in, and then it's just the battle between Vecchione and Lawton, which, for my money, I got Lawton right now, because it's hard to put him on waivers because he has that first round selection. He's still, I keep saying this every time we talk about him. Someone somewhere at some point is going to value the kid. So you can't just put him on waivers and expect him to go right to clear.
And you protected him from Vegas too. So that's another factor.
That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I don't expect Hextall to do that. So, you kind of pencil in the fact that Lear, Bardreau, McDonald, and Vecchione are going to be the ones that go down. And then you still have 14. You still have 2 extra forwards. So you still have a logjam. So you feel bad for a guy like Lear who's playing, very well in the preseason. But, how is he going to make the team?
Yeah, something extreme would have to happen, I would think. Something that would really be unforeseen at this point.
More or less injury.
Well, that too, yeah. And that would be the unfortunate, because if it is an injury of some kind, you don't want it to be to somebody who's highly valued at that point in time. You'd hope it would be somebody that you felt like Lear could replace on the roster in a sense of the role, because you don't want to have to move people up to, say, do something in in Jake Voracek's spot or something like that. You don't want to have to try to figure that out.
Yeah, so. Lear is just a kid that you want on the 4th line. You don't really want him playing top 9 minutes. You kind of want to slot him into the 4th line and see how he does. And the problem with the Flyers right now is they have so many forwards that you're potentially lining up, Valtteri Filppula, Jori Lehtera, and Dale Weiss on your fourth line, if that's going to be the combination or not. But, how could he beat out those guys when they make so much? When when they have guaranteed contracts that, Filppula's got $5 million, he's got a year left, but nobody's going to trade for him now. Maybe a couple months down the road, but it's just it's a logjam that's also a blockade for guys that are really making a statement that they should be NHLers at this point, or at least given a shot. Yeah,
well, and I feel the same way about Matt Reed at this point, because Matt Reed to me hasn't shown me too much in the preseason that Taylor Lear couldn't do, and that's the thing. You're gonna probably end up keeping Reed because of the contract and the fact he's only got 1 year left too, just like Filppula, but it's a sizable contract. You're not paying the guy to just not make the team.
What about the potentiality of buying him out?
That's there, and that's kind of I called that. That's what I kind of call the unforeseeable in a way. Like, I'm looking at it and I'm going, that would be something that we didn't really predict as a possibility going into it. It's there, and you keep it in the back of your mind a little bit, but I don't think we look at that possibility and give it a whole lot of thought right away, because of the fact that for so many years, I think we've just assumed that whoever has the bigger contracts has their spot locked up. And that would be something interesting. That I think that would say a whole lot about the direction the Flyers are going if they chose to buy out Matt Reed and allow Taylor Lear to make it. Because to me, I agree with you guys. I think Lawton's got an edge over Vecchione at this point. But I think Lear has an advantage over Vecchione as well. So to me, if it came down to those four being the last four, Lawton, Lear, Lindblom, and Patrick, I have to take into consideration and take a long look at the fact that all you may have to do is buy out Matt Reed to open up the extra spot that you're looking for to get Lear on the roster. Now, the other question that comes into play is who's going to sit in that regard then, because I wouldn't let Lear make the team and then choose to not play him.
I do almost feel that if they were going to buy him out, that would have been done already, but obviously, like you said, Kevin, it's something you can file under the unexpected. I mean, it's a 9-0 chance.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one other thing we do want to bring up before we start to move on to some of the other things with the preseason, and we'll get into roster battles certainly a lot more later on in the show. But one of the other pieces of news that kind of came out over the weekend, it was floating around as a report for a little bit, and then Ron Hextall confirmed it that the Flyers have hired former LA Kings GM Dean Lombardi as in a front office role, not necessarily specified. He's going to be assisting Ron Hextall. That's about as much as we know. He's going to assist Ron Hextall, but he's not an assistant GM. But he will be assisting Ron Hextall on certain projects, basically.
Assistant to the assistant GM?
Kind of. I mean, let's put it this way. It was going to be hard to call him an assistant GM when the Flyers just put that label on Chris Pryor not long ago. So that you have to leave that into consideration. But obviously,
it's like one of those things one of those kind of roles where they make it sound more important, but it's really just you kind of sit in an office and kind of just shuffle papers around.
Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, it's not surprising given their history, but I don't see anything wrong with it. I know it was met with mixed reactions because of Lombardi's start in LA obviously was one thing, the success he had while Hextall was still an assistant GM over in LA, the fact that 2012 they won a Stanley Cup together, 2014 while Hextall wasn't with the Kings anymore and was on his way to becoming the Flyers GM at the same time, his fingerprints are all over the team that wins the Stanley Cup that year as well. Even though Hextall isn't part of the team, that was still a Lombardi-Hextall construction sort of, if you will. It's the same core. It was most of the same players. So that certainly factors in. And Lombardi also has a history with the Flyers. He was a scout with them for a few years, and things like that. So the history with Hextall, the history with the Flyers made it seem like something logical. Obviously, Lombardi didn't have the greatest ending in LA by any stretch. I mean, there was a lot of turmoil that came his way over the last few years before all the changes. I mean, the vast amount of changes that were made over the course of probably about the past 6 months, really.
Yeah, I would bet that it's some sort of consultant type deal, like somebody for Hextall to bounce ideas off of. They obviously worked very well in LA, as you said, Kevin. They built a team that won 2 Stanley Cups. I think it was on Pro Hockey Talk where they said like everything kind of went awry in LA once Ron Hextall left. Lombardi did go kind of nutty once Hextall left. He was doing all that stuff with Mike Richards, and it won't even get into the rest of the stuff Lombardi was doing. But to me, there's no harm, there's no foul by bringing him in, especially if he's not making any sort of big decisions. It's clearly Ron Hextall's plan, Ron Hextall's decision. And Dean Lombardi gave him, a pretty good job in LA, made him the assistant GM. So you pay back the guys that did you a favor by doing them a favor. So, give the guy a paycheck and don't lose your mind over it. It's not that big of a deal.
It's also something that it allows Lombardi to kind of stick around front office circles in the NHL. Should another assistant GM opening become available somewhere else, or another GM vacancy, with another club, that kind of allows Lombardi to kind of stay in the conversation. And, if he goes and pursues that opening, anywhere else, he'll have a chance with that. And I think that the Flyers will kind of keep him busy and kind of keep him in that circle.
And let's not forget that as a scout, he was able to do some pretty decent work as well, and knew how to pick out good players to build a championship team. You don't get 2 Stanley Cup rings by, making ill-advised choices when you're scouting and trying to find players that will build up a championship team. So obviously, that first part of his tenure in LA was great. Yeah, I know it wasn't a good ending to it at all, and there was a lot of turmoil and trouble, and the Richards thing and everything else beyond that. It's kind of a fresh start for him. I agree with Rob. It sets him up in a position to go somewhere else if an opening comes about later. It gives him something to do. It's Ron Hextall doing him a favor. Yeah, I think absolutely.
And two, like Ron Hextall hasn't been too great in terms of signing free agents, in terms of making moves that will help the Flyers win now. And Dean Lombardi made those, Mike Richards and Jeff Carter deals, and that essentially put the LA Kings over the top. So maybe in that situation, Dean Lombardi can be a guy that can advise Hextall in what win now moves he could make once the team is in a position to, go into that mode.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Obviously, with the Lombardi hiring, it's one of those things that kind of comes with the good and the bad. You have a guy who knows how to build a contender. You have a guy who knows how to win. At the same time, you have a guy, like you mentioned, Dan, with the hit piece that he put out on a great man, Mike Richards. You have the situation with Slava Voinov, and you also have the situations that not necessarily with Slava, but the handling of the situation with Slava Voinov, and basically just kind of the salary cap troubles that he helped put the Kings in. So it's one of those things that kind of comes with the good and the bad. But at the same time, he's more or less just going to be a good sounding board for Hextall, and like you mentioned, he'll be good for kind of figuring out what moves the Flyers need to kind of transition to the win now kind of mode.
Yeah, and if your only reason for not approving of such a move is because of the way the Voinov thing happened and was handled, and the salary cap issues and the Richards situation, that's not the way to go about it. You got to take the good with the bad, like you said, Rob. I mean, he won 2 Stanley Cups as their builder, basically, So you got to take that. You got to take that good part of it and know that this is a guy who was able to construct a Stanley Cup champion. With the fact that there were some situations that were difficult to handle, and he handled them the wrong way, and it probably cost him his job. But that, at some point in time, there's a rise and a fall. The rise was getting to the Stanley Cup Finals and winning 2 Stanley Cups, and the fall came with all those situations. So it happens, but I don't see anything wrong with the move and trying to bounce ideas off of somebody, especially as you get closer to the win now stage. So with the roster picture shaping up, we're going to next take a look at what's happened in the preseason so far and what is to come. So we'll look at that when we return on the Flyerdelphia Podcast. Stay with us.
You're listening to the Flyerdelphia Podcast with Kevin, Rob, and Dan on SportsTalkPhilly.com.
Back here on the Flyerdelphia Podcast, and 4 preseason games are in the books. 4 more still left to be played in the week ahead. So we're going to look at the 4 games already played in this segment, so we'll start with the results. So the Flyers opened the preseason on Sunday afternoon against the New York Islanders. That was a 3-2 overtime loss. Mike Vecchione and Yuri Laterra get goals in that game. The Flyers actually took a 2-0 lead in that game before giving up 3 goals over the course of the remainder of the game. John Tavares had 2 for the Islanders there. Matthew Barzal had the other one that tied the game up, Tavares scoring the game winner in overtime. On Wednesday, they faced the Islanders again in split squad action. One game in Allentown, one game in Brooklyn. The Flyers came out with a 3-2 win in Allentown. Taylor Lear scores twice. Shane Gostisbehere gets the game-winning goal in overtime. And then in Brooklyn, it was a 3-2 loss in regulation. Travis Konechny and TJ Brennan were the goal scorers for the Flyers in that one. And as you would expect in those split squad games, different kind of lineups for each location. It was much more veteran heavy for the Islanders in Brooklyn than it was in Allentown. Flyers kind of played more of their regulars as well in the Allentown game. And then finally Thursday night against the Boston Bruins, a 2-1 overtime loss. No scoring in the game through 2 periods. Into the third period, Travis Sanheim scores for the Flyers before a couple of goals by the Bruins, including the game winner in overtime, hand the Flyers another loss. Games remaining on the preseason schedule for the Flyers in the coming week. Monday night on the road against the Rangers, followed by 3 straight home games at Wells Fargo Center. Tuesday night against the Rangers, Thursday against the Bruins, and Sunday against the Islanders again. So, I mean, guys, based on what you've seen so far, anything in particular that has stood out to you? Any players that have stood out to you? Anything within these games that's worth mentioning?
Well, I was able to take a look at the Boston game, and my goodness, was that game just a slog. So many penalties and all that. So it's a really good opportunity to pay attention to the defenseman, because that's pretty much the only thing you're going to look at. And, man, it was really hard to notice Robert Hagg, because he looked so good. Like, if you don't notice a defenseman, then you know he's doing his job. And he looks like he can fit anywhere in the defensive six. Like, he can be paired with Provorov. I through most of that game, I felt like he could be a natural partner for Provorov. I said 2 podcasts ago or so that he's a natural pairing, a natural partner for Shane Gostisbehere. I'm just impressed more and more with this kid the more I look at him, because he's got that size, he's got that speed, he can bail out a partner if he makes a mistake. So to me, he looks like he's a lock right now. Like he's in, and it's between Sam Morin and Travis Sanheim, who are both playing, very well as well. Morin, not as comfortable with the puck sometimes. He looks like he's getting better, and Travis Sanheim, he looked good against Boston. He, on a rush with Brad Marchand, he was able to stick with him, didn't allow a chance. He scored the lone goal, even though that was a goal that Tuukka Rask should have had. So those 3 look really well. As far as I'm concerned, you might want to consider sending Brandon Manning to the Lehigh Valley Phantoms and keep all 3.
Rob, what about you?
Yeah, definitely like what I saw out of Sanheim in last night's game. I've heard that there were a few knocks on his preseason so far, so it was good to see him get on the board, and he was turning out a pretty decent effort against the Bruins, and obviously we'll see what the rest of the preseason holds for him. I'm still firmly riding that Sam Morin and Robert Hagg train, but for now, obviously we'll see how that one shakes up, and we'll see how that one kind of finishes out. And one of the knocks I heard was kind of a disciplinary issue, but that's something where obviously I wouldn't even worry about that too much. There's still a week to work on that. And, when it comes down to it, I mean, it's a matter of there's been a pretty sharp uptick in penalties over the course of this preseason, just pretty much across the league, with the crackdown on slashing, with face-off violations, which obviously that's another thing in and of itself. And that's something where, that's just leading to a lot more power plays league-wide. And, it's either that or the officials union just decided that they wanted to start getting paid by the whistle, so they're implementing those as well. We'll see how that one goes. But, yeah, I have liked what I've seen out of Sanheim so far, and obviously seeing him get on the board against Boston was obviously pretty awesome too.
There was an element to me of at least for the first 3 games, or the Sunday game and the split squads on Wednesday, where there wasn't much veteran presence in those lineups, which showed the emphasis on the youth for the Flyers that's to come and their push to get it into the lineup. The real standout to me over the course of the preseason so far has been a focus on defensive play, and I'm not just talking about the 3 defensemen that we've been talking about for most of the show. I'm talking about watching forwards play. One player I thought was a huge standout in Thursday's game in Boston was Travis Konechny. I think every shift he took, he was doing something positive. His energy was great. He was able to create turnovers and create chances, and his play between the blue lines in his own zone translated into the offensive zone. He was just all over the place every time he was on the ice. But to a point, Oscar Lindblom makes a really good play on the back check in that game on Thursday as well against Boston. The way that Haig and Moran have been able to show such growth in their positioning and their defensive play has been so impressive. Nolan Patrick's doing things to emphasize a two-way game. And it makes me so far, we're going to talk about later in the show about things to come, looking ahead at the week ahead and things I guess we want to see. And yeah, one of the things we're going to say we want to see is more offense. You have the 3 goals in the Allentown win, 2 in Brooklyn, 2 in Long Island on Sunday, and 1 on Thursday in Boston. And it's kind of like, where's the scoring coming from? You got 2 goals from Lear. You've got defensemen who are scoring goals. There's 3 defensemen who have scored goals in the preseason. That first lineup where you're scoring 2 goals in a 3-2 overtime loss in Long Island didn't feature many players that were meant to be emphasized. They were going to be Phantoms players. They were going to be junior players. So, yeah, you want to see more of that. But I'm very impressed with the way that these younger players at this point have put an emphasis on the two-way game and trying to cut down on mistakes being made in the defensive zone to allow for better chances in the offensive zone. So anything else for you guys that are standout points or anything that you want to discuss about the preseason games we've seen so far?
One thing I did think was cool was that first preseason game against the Islanders actually being held at the Coliseum on Long Island.
Sellout too, yeah.
Yeah, there's one of those barns that there's a lot of history behind it, and for the Flyers to kind of have that opportunity. Obviously, they didn't get the result they wanted, but I'm sure the Islander fans, were sent home happy. Not that I really care about them, but they. It's one of those buildings that the Flyers have had a lot of history themselves in, and getting that chance, and the Islanders arena woes are well documented by this point, so that kind of opportunity was present too, and it's almost at the point where the Islanders they might as well just play every game outside. I know the networks and the NHL would just completely fallen over that. The New York Islanders, every game's a Winter Classic, but that's something where having that opportunity to play there, it's it's one of those buildings that doesn't look like much, but there is a lot of history behind it, and for them to have that chance is pretty neat.
Well, how about if you're Nolan Patrick or Oscar Lindblom and you haven't played in an NHL building before, your first real game action is the rookie game in the building that you're going to call home eventually, and then your first preseason game is in the Coliseum on Long Island. Talk about a venue to play in for your first ever NHL game, preseason or not.
I have never stepped foot in the Coliseum, and I don't really plan to, but it's one of those places that – remember the old musty, the old stale beer smell of the old Spectrum? The Coliseum looks like it has that smell to it.
I wouldn't be surprised.
And that's honestly, if I can find that scent in like an air conditioner from my car, I'd be all for it.
All right, so any final thoughts on the preseason games so far before we move on to our next segment and go into our roster battles?
I know we touched on the amount of penalties that have been called in the preseason, and it's hopefully only to enforce these new rules and reinforce the old rules like obstruction and all that, because goodness, if it's like this to start the regular season, you might want to, bring a book or have something else to do while these hockey games are being played, because having watched the China game Thursday morning, it was Thursday morning, and in the game against Boston, it was just nonstop, no flow whatsoever to the games, just penalty after penalty. It's unwatchable. So hopefully, come the regular season, the players will either have learned or the refs will lighten up a little bit, and we can get some flow to 5-on-5 hockey, because if it's nothing but power play exchanges, it's going to be garbage.
Yeah, the first period of the game in Allentown on Wednesday was just brutal. 2 quick penalties on the Flyers that gave the Islanders a 5-on-3, pretty much within the first minute and a half of the game, I guess, and Barzal scored on that. And then there was just nothing but penalties for the rest of the first period. There was almost no 5-on-5 action at all. And that's just, it makes it very hard to get into the flow of a game. You want to see the game at even strength a lot. It's hard to evaluate where players are, too, if they're not playing at even strength. Special teams is a totally different animal. So to watch games like this, there's no flow to them at all, and it's been brutal to watch. And I get what they're trying to do. I do think some of the rule changes have merit to them. I just think the way they're being enforced in the preseason, it better not be an indicator of what we see when the regular season starts.
Hopefully not.
As we turn the page to the final week of the preseason, we are going to start to revisit some of the roster battles that we made, or that we talked about when we made roster predictions a couple weeks ago. So stay tuned. That is coming up next here on the Flyerdelphia Podcast.
You're listening to the Flyerdelphia Podcast with Kevin, Rob, and Dan on SportsTalkPhilly.com.
Back here on the Flyerdelphia Podcast, and with 4 games left until the preseason wraps and the final roster is announced, the halfway point is a good place to look at any remaining battles for a roster spot. So we're going to do that now, and we've touched on a couple of these already. We've talked about the battle for fourth line spots on this team among the forwards, and Scott Laughton and Mike Vecchione is certainly one. I think all 3 of us at this point have said we kind of give Laughton the edge, and we talked a lot about why, the waiver exempt that Vecchione is, the fact that he doesn't have to go through waivers to make it back to the Phantoms, Laughton being protected from the expansion draft, and kind of being given a vote of confidence by Ron Hextall by having that happen. Just a lot of different things like that, and we talked about Vecchione being in the group of players that were going to be with the Phantoms. So we really did touch on that one a lot, and we've been touching on this other one as well, the defensemen, Sam Morin, Robert Hagg, Travis Sanheim. You've got pretty much 2 spots open, 3 defensemen. So, guys, I think we all had different combinations of the 3 when we were making our roster projections. So what are you guys thinking now after the fact? Rob, you kind of talked about it in the last segment that you're sticking to your Morin-Hagg prediction. Dan, what about you?
Like I said in the beginning of the not the beginning, like I said in the last section, I'm kind of leaning towards, can we keep all 3? Can Ron Hextall send Brandon Manning down to the Phantoms? And save, because it's not going to be all that much in terms of dead cap space, because it'll only be 25,000, which is nothing to the Flyers. Because Sanheim, it looked like he was falling behind. He didn't have a great start to the preseason, but he's catching up. He's caught up now in my eyes to Morin, and Morin is he's been impressive to me as well. He's controlling the puck. He's using his size. He's using his stick. There was an early play in the Boston game where he just faked out I think it was one of the Boston's younger players, but he still faked him out, and made a play along the boards. So, if you want to talk lineup optimization, then why not just have Sanheim, Morin, and Hagg all play? They're going to play. They're going to make their way into the Flyers lineup eventually. So just stick them all in there now. Make Andrew McDonald the 7th defenseman, $5 million, sit on the bench guy, or in the press box, excuse me. But yeah, just keep all these. They all deserve to make the team as far as I'm concerned, because they're all playing very well right now.
Andrew McDonald in the press box. Dan, are you trying to make Christmas come early for Flyers fans? So here's the thing. When we made these roster predictions, 2 weeks ago, I had Morin and Sanheim making a team, and I said that was going to be because of Sanheim proving he belonged more than Hagg doing something to lose the spot. This is really tough at this point because I've really been impressed with Hagg in the preseason to this point. I feel like he's been so steady this entire preseason, and Morin has too. They've come in very improved, and Morin to me looks like one of the better defensemen in camp. So does Hagg, really. They've both been so impressive. I can see Sanheim being the odd man out for a couple of mistakes that will happen over the course of a preseason. You're going to cough the puck up maybe a couple times. You're going to have something happen with a turnover, something like that. He's definitely more polished than he has been in years past. He's hanging in there with the rest of them. I do agree. I didn't think Sanheim's game on Wednesday night would qualify as better than Hagg or Morin, but I thought his game on Thursday was a lot better. And that all of a sudden made it tough again. I kind of came out of Wednesday's game going, in my mind going, I'm going to have to take the L on this one and put Haig on the team and say Sanheim's going back because of the fact that, Haig's been so impressive that he's earned it now. It's their time. It's these two guys who were both drafted in the same year, have both been playing professionally for, in Haig's case it's been 3 years. Moran's case it's been roughly the same, just a little, I think it's a little under. I think he's had 2 pro years, and it's their time. Simple as that. That being said, Sanheim is hanging in there now. He's definitely made this a race again. It's going to be really close. It's going to come right down to the very end, I think. So as cool as it would be for them to keep all 3, I'm trying to figure out the logistics and how they do that. It could just be as easy as sending Manning down. I just don't see the Flyers doing that because I feel like they're just going to let him stay as the 7th defenseman. They're going to want to keep McDonald in the lineup just because it's been what they've done lately. In the years past, you've got obviously your other 3 you're talking are Provorov, Gudis, and Gostisbehere. So to me, I think it's Moran and Haig, and Sanheim's on the verge of getting there, but just not quite. But it's close. It's very close.
Yeah, I don't expect the Flyers to actually do that, but that's essentially my request. Is just play the 3 kids because as far as I'm concerned, they've earned the spot. Maybe Sanheim in the next few games will not, but it seems like he's improving every game. So as far as I can see, he's just going to get better and better. And if he's going to improve upon how he played in Boston, then he should be NHL ready by the end of the preseason, at least as far as I can surmise.
I thought in the rookie game, both Sanheim and Myers left a lot to be desired in that game just because there was discipline issues for Sanheim in that game. There were turnovers from both of them, and it kind of left a lot to be desired. And then Sanheim has progressively gotten better with each game. Myers kind of leveled off. He had a pretty bad turnover to Tavares in that first preseason game against the Islanders, and really didn't last much longer than the Wednesday split squads, obviously. And Myers is back to the AHL as expected. Sanheim, on the other hand, I could see going to the AHL for the same reason as Myers. It's a chance to play top pairing minutes and be the focal point of that defensive group. But he could easily pass for an NHL defenseman. He's done it. He did it very well on Thursday. I have to see what he is able to do starting on Monday and then kind of carrying it through the rest of the preseason. But I think there was now some separation between Sanheim and Myers that wasn't there when the rookie game happened, and maybe even, you could even say the first preseason game.
My big thing, too, with talking about potentially waiving Brandon Manning and sending him down to Lehigh Valley and then scratching Andrew McDonald and making him the 7th defenseman is Sanheim, is Myers, is Haig, are all those guys better than what McDonald and Manning are right now? And if the answer is yes, then why are they playing?
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer, and there's been this infatuation with both of the guys. I don't have a problem with Manning because Manning to me was never going to be more than the 7th this year anyway. So whether he makes it or doesn't, that there's no harm, no foul to me. I think your bigger question is Sanheim, Moran, Haig, however you want to combine them. To me, Moran and Haig have their spots, I think. I think this is a matter of, is Sanheim going to be better than McDonald? And if the answer is yes to that question, then yeah, he should be there. But I don't, again, it goes back to Ron Hextall's MO is to put kids where he feels like they'll thrive, where they'll get the time. I don't know that he's going to allow Sanheim to replace an Andrew McDonald right out of the gate like that, as opposed to waiting until, McDonald's going to start coming in on the territory where they could start to think about buying him out too. And there's a big difference between this year and next year when you get to next offseason and you start to think about how do we create another open space, assuming Sanheim's ready and Myers is the one who's knocking on the door after one pro season. And the way you've got to create a spot. That's the thing. So you're going to have to try to find a way to move somebody. You're not going to move a Provorov or a Gostisbehere or a Moran or Haig if they were new to it. You're going to try to keep those guys as main core players. You still have Gudis under contract. It starts to make Manning and McDonald the odd players out.
And of course, too, you can always send Sanheim down and just call him up as soon as there's an injury. So that just might be the path of least resistance for Hextall as well.
Yeah, I think I kind of agree with that.
Yeah, I like the idea of just sending him down, just letting him kind of work his game in the AHL, and then as soon as somebody goes down, just bring him back in. And obviously the thing about guys like Andrew McDonald and Brandon Manning is you already know what you're going to get from guys like Brandon Manning and Andrew McDonald. You're not going to get anything special. They might be good for the occasional play. They might be good for the occasional, you guys didn't completely blow it out there. But, for the most part, you already know what you're getting out of them. And if there's a way that you can bring all these kids up and keep them on, I'm all for it. But I don't know if that's the most logistical option. I don't know if that's the safest option for the Flyers. Obviously, like you mentioned, Dan, the path of least resistance, the safe route is to kind of stash Sanheim or maybe even Haig if Sanheim sticks around with the big club, with the Phantoms for a little bit more and then bringing them up as soon as they need to be brought up.
Well, the thing is, you just mentioned if Haig's the one who in Sanheim made the team, and Haig, that's the logic that I had going into kind of picking who I thought was going to make the roster, and I think it's reversed now. I think Haig's carved out a spot for himself. Now, one thing I wanted to bring up, too, in terms of roster battles, it's not really a roster battles per se, but we knew that coming into this that Nolan Patrick and Oscar Lindblom were going to be two big parts of this training camp just because the focus was going to really be heavy on those two, about them making the team and their really their first chance to make the team. Nolan Patrick obviously being the most recent top draft pick the Flyers have, and Lindblom being finally under an entry-level contract to be able to be eligible to play for the Flyers and giving the North American game full-time a shot here. So the big question at this point is we're 4 games down the road here, 4 games to go, and halfway through this preseason, with 29 players still left on the roster, and obviously one of the players among the 29 is Alex Lyon, a goalie who will have to be cut. So they're among 26 skaters, and it's going to fill 21 spots. So are these two in at this point? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think so. There's obviously considering how much they could provide up front, and what they can basically kind of provide that youthful injection going forward. I always kind of figured it wasn't, will they? I always kind of figured it was, when they make the team, what's going to happen from here. So I think that there is that place at the table for them. I think that they can, obviously there's going to be some growing pains along the way. That's just how it always is. If there's a way you can prevent that, then I'm all for it. But at the end of the day, it's something where it's all but inevitable at this point, and it's something I'm pretty much, very much looking forward to, I should say.
Sure. What about you, Dan?
Well, Kevin, you touched on it with Nolan Patrick and Oscar Lindblom before, particularly Lindblom going on that back check in Boston. These guys have proven that they can play both sides of the ice, which have endeared them as far as I can say with Dave Haxtell. Nolan Patrick was creating all sorts of havoc in Boston. He looked like he belonged on that power play unit. He had some chemistry. I know we talked before we started recording, talked about how Patrick played well with Wayne Simmons and Jordan Wheel. So that's a trio that might have some chemistry going into the regular season. So it just seems like their spots are already assured. Oscar Lindblom was on the first power play unit. You don't stick a guy you're not really sure of is an NHL player on the first power play unit and say like, all right, kid, have fun. Let's see if you fit in. It's assured as far as I can see. Like, I haven't seen the dynamic offense execution, but it's also the preseason. These kids are probably still a little jittery. They're still trying to find chemistry with guys. This is their first time playing with these guys, these particular set of players. So it's all there. I can't see them being sent back to juniors or Sweden or the AHL. It's all there. They're the complete package, and I really can't wait to see them develop and gain the chemistry with some of those line mates. I like to see Lindblom play with Giroux and Voracek some more too.
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys. And here's the thing about these two players. After every game, sometimes during, I'll see or hear different things about Nolan Patrick. And it's all about if Patrick is doing enough to earn a spot on the team and how he's progressing. And maybe that has to do a lot with him being a high draft pick and coming off an injury. That being said, and I'm shifting this to Oscar Lindblom in this case, I haven't heard a single thing about Lindblom's place on the team. He's consistently playing with veterans. He's playing in all situations. They're treating him like he's a veteran coming into camp with a spot locked up. That's how, like we said, top power play. You're playing on the first line. So at this point, he is a lock. For Patrick, I think he makes it. But, the thing about it is you're wary because Ron Hextall kind of gave that little push a couple days ago that was we're looking to see a little more out of him, and there's still time for that. Funny enough, I think right around the time that little push was given, and I think it was right before the Wednesday games against the Islanders, Patrick was playing with mainly rookies and prospects in those first few games, and now that he's going to start playing with veterans in these games, I think, the game in Boston was a horrible example for this because that was the first action for a lot of veterans. So it was going to be a sloppy game. When it's Claude Giroux's first game of the preseason, it's Wayne Simmons' first game of the preseason, things like that. But as Patrick plays with better talent, watch what happens. To me, the pass to Shane Gostisbehere on the game winner on Wednesday, the no-look pass to Simmons on Thursday that nearly resulted in a goal, that's just scratching the surface with his potential. So I see enough to merit the extended look. To me, he hasn't done anything to take his chance away. You're just always wary about Ron Hextall being the type of guy who goes, I'm not disappointed if I have to do this, or if he goes back to juniors. The problem with him going back to juniors is Nolan Patrick has outgrown that level of play. What he's been able to do, and even if it's a little difficult for him with NHL players, what he's been able to do with NHL players, even if it's not coming as easily, he would absolutely be so far above the competition at juniors. There's really no sense in doing this. Let him mold. He's obviously, he's off of an injury that doesn't look to be bothering him. That's the good thing. He looks like he's healthy. He's just also trying to get back into the rhythm of things. So let him get back into the rhythm of things as the season progresses. And like I said, watch what happens when you put him in a situation where he's playing with somebody like, where he's playing with Jordan Wheel and Wayne Simmons in a preseason game, especially after they have some time. I think that the last couple of games, they're going to play Boston on Thursday night, and they're going to play the Islanders on Sunday evening to close out the preseason, 2 home games there. I think those 2 games are going to be great markers for where these players are as the season is about to start. All right, so when we come back on the Flyerdelphia Podcast, we're going to wrap things up for this week with a look ahead to the final week of the preseason, kind of some of the things that we are looking forward to seeing in the final week of the preseason. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Flyerdelphia Podcast with Kevin, Rob, and Dan on SportsTalkPhilly.com.
Back here on the Flyerdelphia Podcast, and in our final segment this week, we look ahead to the final week of the preseason and the start of the regular season coming up on October 4th. So, guys, what are you looking ahead to in this final week of the preseason?
Well, for the final week, I'm really just looking to see what Chris Knobloch can do or what the Flyers can adapt to in terms of his power play strategy, because against Boston, they were 0 for 9. And now that's not really important. Like, it doesn't matter because some of those were abbreviated power plays. It's preseason. A lot of guys are rusty, as you said in the last segment, Kevin. But there were so few chances. And I know a couple chances were just whiffed on, like Claude Giroux missed a one-timer, Jake Voracek missed a one-timer, but there was absolutely no, it's like, it looked like as if they had just seen a power play for the first time. And so like they were like a baby deer trying to walk for the first time. Like it looks, and it's going to look sloppy, but it's just, you expected there to be at least a little like, some residual effect from practicing it. So I'm looking for that to gradually improve so it doesn't look like a train wreck in the regular season. And then, we've been talking about the defensive battle between Sanheim, Haig, and Moran. And as I said in the last segment, I'm just looking to see if Travis Sanheim continues to improve, if he can push Sam Moran for that last spot, because I think a lot of us are thinking that Robert Haig, is a lock.
Rob, what about you?
And obviously, when you get 9 power play chances, and what Knobloch can do for the team, that goes hand in hand with the number of calls, just the increased volume of calls that these referees are making. And if you're going to get 9 power plays in a game, you're going to have to cash in on a good chunk of those. And if you're not able to cash in on those, you're certainly in trouble. So that's something that the Flyers obviously need to work on. And one thing I'm kind of looking forward to next week. It kind of is as we enter the kind of the white flag stage of the preseason, the final lap. But yeah, is how Claude Giroux is going to handle this transition to the left wing that he started earlier this week, and that's something where he didn't give it a chance to try it out against Boston, but probably just because it was on such short notice. But that's something where he'll get the chance to work on that. That's something that I've been particularly interested in. That's something where we never really considered that as a possibility for him. He just kind of took for granted that he was going to be the first line center for this year and several more seasons to come. So I'd like to see how he can handle that move to the wing, and kind of how he can make that adjustment and how he can move forward from there. If he's going to have a chance to try that out in game action, I'm very much curious to see how that would go and what we could expect out of that, and kind of see how that works out. Is it something that's going to blow up spectacularly? Is it something that's going to work out like a charm, or is it going to be somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, I'm going to kind of go off of some things that both of you guys said, and I've got one more on top of that, but for three of my 4 points at least, it's going to echo what both of you guys said. So I'll kind of go off of that first. So I'll start with the power play first, because I do want to see a better power play system. The 0 for 9 in Boston wasn't really a full lineup yet. It was close to, but it wasn't quite that. And then you can sit there and say you haven't run systems just yet, but you need to start by next week. The last 4 games are going to be where you want to see everything start to take shape. This is what needs to be established kind of within a week. We did an entire show earlier over the offseason about the addition of Chris Knobloch and what that could do for the power play. So without system work in place yet, the first couple of power plays that I saw both on Wednesday and Thursday were very much the same vanilla, stale power play that fizzled out at the end of last year, because that's all they know how to run right now. So I want to see more from that grouping, and I want to see Knobloch's fingerprints on the power play units soon too, to see how they go about approaching the power play with his influence coming up. I will touch on one of Dan's other points too, defensively. One of the things I've been really impressed with, and I'll throw Sanheim in this now. To me, Moran and Haig are still the leaders, but I'll throw Sanheim in the mix as well for this. I've just been really impressed by the small sample size of those 3 players with Ivan Provorov, Shane Gostisbehere, Radko Gudas, guys like that. And I just want to see how pairings start to shape up over the course of this last week of preseason games. Defensively, I think you want to start seeing some consistency. It's been good in a small sample size. Let's see it branch out a little bit more. Let's see if they keep that up for the rest of the preseason. This is where you go from seeing the roster take shape to potential combinations. Let's see how it all stacks up. I'm definitely curious, to go off of Rob's last point, to see if the Claude Giroux left wing experiment finds its way into a game. Dave Haxtell said it will. I do need to see it actually happen, but I kind of would just like to see if it changes anything for Giroux. I want to see what kind of game he has in that situation, and just see how he plays as a winger as opposed to a center. It's been a long time since we've seen Claude Giroux play in the wing. I mean, you got to go back to the very early stages of his career when he was listed as a right winger to see what he did on the wing. So this could be an interesting move for him. I'd like to see it. While you can still experiment with it, I'd like to see that, and then who knows where it'll end up later on down the road. And then lastly, I'm looking ahead to what the prospects in position to claim roster spots bring with more system work, with more regular play, with veterans, extended ice time. It's difficult to find a rhythm with not as many established NHL players on the ice. So for Oscar Lindblom and Nolan Patrick, I just want to see them working with veterans. I want to see the Patrick Wheel-Simmons line. I want to see Lindblom playing more. And the thing with Lindblom is this is kind of a double-edged sword with this sense, because I want to see Lindblom playing on the top line with Claude Giroux and Jake Voracek, and at the same time, I want to see Giroux continue the left wing experiment to an extent too. So Giroux playing on the left wing would not put Lindblom on the same line as Giroux, but I'm curious to see both situations. Like I said, this is why I experiment now. You experiment to see how Lindblom looks as a top-line left winger, how he looks on the top power play unit. You look at Giroux on the left wing, and maybe you give Sean Couturier a shot to play that center role between Voracek and Giroux, if that's how you decide to play the wings. There's a lot of options that you have to move those players around, so I'm curious to see how they decide to do it.
Yeah, on the Giroux at wing discussion, because we talked about that for pretty much a whole show when we were discussing Giroux's viability long term with the organization. And I wrote about that in a similar article. And it didn't seem like that was such a bad idea, like down the road. But in the here and now, like having Sean Couturier as your first line center, and then you have potentially Patrick as your Nolan Patrick as your second line center, and then Filppula, Laterra, or Lawton. This just seems like a really, and all due respect, a very average team down the middle. Like Claude Giroux really makes it like he gives Nolan Patrick an easier route to development if he's at center, because it takes the pressure off of Nolan Patrick. Because if Patrick has to be a second line center, he's going to see second pairing defenseman instead of third pairing defenseman. He's going to see a higher probability of seeing a checking line against him. If Patrick is on a third line and he's playing, like, obviously he's not going to be playing with the top wingers on the team, but it still gives him a little bit extra space. It gives him a little bit extra elbow room to develop the way he should, and that's the part that concerns me about moving Giroux to wing, is that it could potentially impact Patrick down the road and in the here and now.
Well, yeah, in the here and now, I didn't think it made as much sense just because of the fact that, to me, I don't think Giroux going to the wing right now works unless Nolan Patrick's going to be your top-line center, because I find it hard to believe Sean Couturier is going to be the top-line center when for years and years and years, while you have been looking for more out of him from an offensive standpoint, and putting him on a top line obviously is something that's meant to drive offensive play, he's always been good as your third-line center, as a shutdown guy, to play against the opponent's top line. So you take that out of the equation at that point. So I don't have any problem with Nolan Patrick playing second-line minutes and trying to work matchups where you can. It's more or less that, to me, if you're going to make the maneuver or maneuver people around to put Patrick second line, I think you'd want to have Couturier third line just to balance out the defensive play against another team's top forwards. But then you would have to have Giroux as your top line forward or top line center, because what are you going to do at that point? Put Filppula on the top line? That doesn't make as much sense either. So you start to lose the options in that sense. So I think that while it's an interesting experiment, I think it doesn't really see much more beyond the preseason at this point. Not unless Couturier really finds a way to make it work with him, but I don't see that happening either. I think Giroux at center is still an option. I think you have a more likely chance of seeing Oscar Lindblom be a first-line left winger with Giroux and Voracek than you do Giroux shifting to the wing, at least in the here and now.
Yeah, Couturier is really good at being a third-line center. He can be okay at second-line center. Corsi people love him at second-line center, but it's not 2 + 2 = 4 with Sean Couturier. His Corsi is fantastic, but his traditional stats are not that great. They're not second-line center, results. And so there's only so much you can put into Corsi and say, like, all right, this guy's actually really good. And I'm not saying he's not really good, because he is. He's very good at his job. He can shut down guys. He can shut down Malkin. It's well documented throughout his career. He's great defensively. But if you can't put the puck in the back of the net, if you can't create chances, he was dreadful on the second power play unit last season, then what is he doing at second-line center, let alone first-line center? Like, he has the capability of being that guy that goes in front of the net and banging home pucks and scoring that way, but that potential has never been realized. Like, I think I've only seen him score that closely in, like, a playoff game against Pittsburgh, and that was, like, God, it feels like 10 years ago. So I as much as I'd like to see Sean Couturier produce at the expectation that his Corsi puts him on, I got to see it. It has to happen before he gets rewarded with being a first-line center.
Yeah, absolutely.
And obviously, the thing about Couturier is having him as the first-line center, even with Giroux on the wing, isn't exactly the flashiest option. It's not the most high-profile option, but that's something where if you put him up there playing alongside guys like Giroux and Voracek, that's going to increase his offensive totals. And that's something everybody's been waiting on out of him, basically since he shut down Malkin in those playoffs all those years ago. So that's something where, playing alongside guys like Giroux and Voracek is no doubt going to have a positive increase and uptick in his offensive production. But at the same time, if you have a situation like what's been going on for the past several years where Giroux and Voracek on the same line starts to get shut down, that's something that could be really troubling. And Obviously, it's an easy argument, I think, that comes to mind right away. But when you also remember that Michael Raffl played left wing on a line with Giroux and Voracek previously, and he didn't exactly put up gaudy numbers. So at the same time, it can go either way. But I do have that theory that putting Couturier up there could let him let his offensive totals blow up. And he's been overdue for a few years now, and that's something I think could happen. But we'll see how that goes.
I had a conversation, or I was doing something the other day where somebody tried to say that Raffl was going to be wait until you see what Raffl can do when he's playing top line left wing this year. And I wanted to slam my head against a wall, because it's like, you realize that they've actually got a legitimate left wing possibility there now if they put Lindblom up there, or even a Jordan Wheel or Travis Konechny on the wing like that. It's just crazy to think how people value Raffl so much as this higher end player, and he doesn't even really fit into the top 6 conversation anymore. But they're going to sit there and act like he does because they don't know anything else, I guess. I don't know, but I can't believe that it was even brought up as a possibility. It's never been a possibility for me.
Yeah, and this line of Couturier, Voracek, and Giroux, it just seems to be like putting all your eggs in one basket, like Rob said. If you're going to put all these guys together on one line, then if they get shut down by, a McDonough, a Keith, any number of the top pairing defensemen in the National Hockey League, then who's going to score? You're going to rely. Then you're going to put, as I said before, you're going to rely more on Nolan Patrick to score. You're going to rely on lines that are being centered by Phil Palillatera or Lawton to score. And this team has had a really hard time getting balanced scoring, having their bottom 6 score. That's not how you create balance. Last season, they had really good couple of games with Couturier, Konechny, and Voracek together. They looked like a first line, to be honest. They just didn't produce at a first line level. So, just if the Flyers want to cure their ails, make it balanced. This is the opposite of making it balanced. You're putting everyone together, and then once they get shut down, and they will, it's not going to be a great result for Haxall and the Flyers.
Well, yeah, it creates balance. A top line that is centered by Giroux with Lindblom and Voracek. There's a little bit more balance among those three. You certainly get a better. You certainly get a better feel going down the lineup at that point. I mean, I like the fact that we're sitting here talking about, when we did this 2 weeks ago, we're talking about potential lines, and you're throwing guys who really did belong on the third or fourth line as projections. We have to throw guys like. At one point in time, I think there's some of us that may have put somebody like Travis Konechny or Jordan Wheel on a third line, just because you have so many players up in the top 6 that actually work for your top 6. So it does make a difference.
Yeah, if you have Claude Giroux, Lindblom, and Voracek together on the first line, then you can have a second line of Couturier with Konechny or Wheel or Raffl, and then you can have Nolan with Wheel or Raffl and Simmons. Wayne Simmons, your top goal scorer, would be on your third line. That's balance. That's 3 lines that can potentially put the puck in the net. And if you put everyone together, then you're already bunching up. Maybe you'll have a second line that can do something. Maybe you'll have Konechny with Simmons and Patrick, and they can do something. But then you're stretching the bottom 6, and that's what's haunted this team for how long has it been? 5 seasons?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something like that. And but there's an element to it that works, or not that works, but you think about it and you go, isn't it a lot better to think about a fourth line that you may want to get a goal for you every now and then, that has somebody like Yuri Laterra, Michael Raffl, Scott Lawton, Dale Weiss, maybe even it could be Valtteri Filppula, but guys like that, and it's an expensive fourth line, but it's much better than the fourth lines the Flyers have rolled out in years past.
That's true, but it's also, those lines weren't expected to score. The fans expected them to score, but the coaches never did. Those fourth lines were traditionally used to, hey man, just go out there, give us maybe 9 minutes a night, don't do anything wrong, and just survive for those 9-10 minutes of ice time and get us through it, and our top 3 will score. Mm-hmm. Our top 3 lines will score. And now everyone's shifted to this idea that all 4 lines have to score. And that's nice because, you see a team like Pittsburgh and Nashville that has lines that all 4 of them could put pucks in the net. But then you had teams like Minnesota, and you had teams like the New York Rangers, who didn't get very far in the playoffs and lost to teams that they probably should have beat in the playoffs. And they were considered the most progressive lineups in the National Hockey League, and they lost. So it's not a foolproof plan to have 4 lines that could potentially score. You don't know how Jori Lehtera is going to do. You don't know if Dale Weiss is going to perform the way he's going to be. So, yeah, I get it. It'd be great if all 4 lines could score, but, who's going to be able to stop the other team, too? Now, a lot more of the defensive onus on the forward core is on a guy like Sean Couturier, who's pretty much one of the few guys that's actually really good at it.
Yeah, I think with the 4th line, it's just important to have guys in there who have the potential to put the puck in the net every now and then. When you look above and you go, the reason that they are on your 4th line is because they don't fit into the top 9 picture where the real scoring has to come from. I think that's the thing. We kind of talked about it over the offseason where you'd go back and go, how many bottom 6 players do the Flyers have that are clogging up the top, the middle 6 or playing second line minutes when they should have been down here? It's that kind of thing.
Yeah, I get that. I see a bunch of these. I'm looking at these potential lines right now, and I'm seeing a bunch of guys who, if they play like on the penalty kill, man, are they good penalty killers? Or wow, you're gonna Wayne Simmons was really good at killing penalties last season, no doubt about it. But do you really want to lose him to blocking a shot, breaking his foot on a blocked shot?
Sure,
not really. So, it's a give or take. And when you have a guy I'm not really going to defend Bellemare and Vandevelde because God knows. Heard their names enough in this town, but if those guys got hurt blocking a shot, it didn't really matter because that was their job essentially. As cruel as that sounds.
No, I mean, same thing for Ryan White when he was here a couple of years ago too. That's the kind of guy who you don't feel huge loss over if something happens.
Yeah, and now they don't play Raffle on the penalty kill because apparently he has this weird shot blocking poise stance.
Oh,
and
does he ever?
Yeah. And who else is going to do that? Lawton was an absolute headache a couple of years ago. So you hope that the kid, can kill penalties now. Filppula could kill penalties. But at that point you're really stretching it out for anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, unless they factor Lehtera in there at all. I mean, I don't know. I think Hextall valued him that way, but you are starting to stretch it at that point for sure. All right, so that's going to do it for this episode of the Flyerdelphia Podcast. We want to thank everyone for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and Google Play and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We will next be with you. Our next show will drop on the morning of the season opener. So you can listen to it leading up to Flyer Sharks on October 4th. Going to kind of be all over the place for the next couple of weeks while we settle into a specific slot for you over the regular season that fits on the off nights of the schedule there. But bottom line is we'll be looking ahead at what the Flyers' final roster is by then, getting ready for not just the first game of the season, but the entire West Coast trip that's going to open the season for the Flyers. And it should just be a very exciting night. We'll have a lot of stuff for you on that show. So once again, thanks for listening. For Rob Riches and Dan Heaning, I am Kevin Durso, and this has been the Flyerdelphia Podcast on SportsTalkPhilly.com.
This has been another edition of the Flyerdelphia Podcast with Kevin Durso, Rob Riches, and Dan Heaning, presented by SportsTalkPhilly.com.